So this is a pretty representative sampling of some of the pieces that I've done this semester. You'll actually note that on this wall, no two pieces of paper are the same. They're all different surfaces. This one is actually a velvet paper. We've got two corrugated papers, but they're actually with different corrugation patterns. This is your typical straight corrugation, and this one's actually a wavy corrugation. This is a more typical paper. It's actually just a Stonehenge paper. This paper is actually transparent paper, so I painted it on one side, ended up thinking it had almost too much clarity, and so then I flipped it over and started painting through the back because I could see through it. So you'll note that actually it has two different sides, and depending on how much clarity I want, I can display either side. This paper is a wrinkled paper. It also has a light level of iridescence already built into it when you purchase it. And I actually purchased all of these papers. I would like to get into paper making, but that is in and of itself an art and takes a lot of time. So I prefer currently to purchase my papers and then change them just by painting on them, but not to actually have to go through making them and then changing them. And then this paper is actually a silk paper, and it does have an iridescence on it that you'll see, but I actually applied that myself. So it came as just a standard silk paper with a little bit of a sheen to it because of the silk, and then I went ahead and applied an iridescence on top of that. So the fact that I choose to make so many paper choices is because it makes each of the paintings unique. They become their own sort of individual object within a larger field, and each of them can be taken both separately, but then as a larger whole they still stand out as being their own unique moment. It doesn't become overwhelming that you might see the same creature in each of them because they still feel like this one moment in time. And working with this type of continually changing surface is interesting because a lot of times I won't know how the paper is going to behave until I'm painting on it. So things sort of happen and they're out of my control, but then I have to sort of go with the flow. So actually with this corrugated paper, the first time I worked on it, which was with this painting, I was unaware that as I spread the water onto it, because it's not actually meant to be a watercolor paper, the corrugated paper lifted off the glued backing paper that it was on and stretched out a good 3 to 4 inches. So the proportions are a little bit longer than I had originally intended them to be, and then I had to try to work around that and try to make that seem like it flowed within the painting. By the time I got to this one, I was a little more prepared for that, but again, the waviness of it actually meant that this one detached differently than this one did, because some areas of the wave kept it to the paper in ways that, because this one was straight, it came right off the paper. So then I had to deal with it being kind of half attached to the backing paper, which again, I was not prepared for when I first purchased the paper. And I actually like those moments where something happens and you just kind of have to respond to it intuitively. I think sometimes I have a lot of control over what I'm doing, but it's nice to insert moments where I have to respond to something that's out of my control. In the velvet paper, actually what happens is that wherever you erase in the velvet, it sort of depresses the velvet hairs that are on top of the paper, and then as you paint into it, those depressions leave a different mark. So you end up seeing everywhere that you've erased. And so again, I was not prepared for that the first time that I worked on the velvet paper, but it was a happy circumstance that I discovered that, and now that's something that I incorporate into future velvet paintings. The velvet paper also allows water to settle differently. So for instance, there's a line that happened here that I was not anticipating would happen, but that I think really frames out the composition very nicely. You'll notice that there are some paintings that actually have no subjects in them. They're just sort of abstract fields. And that's because when I tile paintings like this, I feel like if I had animals in all of them, first of all, they wouldn't achieve a very unified, coherent mass on the wall anymore. And also by having sort of these spacer abstract pieces in it, you have people sort of searching for animals in some of them because they're not sure if they should be there or not. And then you have people feeling the loss of the animals, so you start questioning whether or not, even though they're ubiquitous right now, if they're always going to be that way, and whether or not the human influence is what's going to cause them to go away, or if it's going to be something else, or if they're just, maybe not here, but if there's a pile of them somewhere else, maybe it's okay they're not here. It starts bringing up conceptual questions in the minds of the viewer, which I really like. So many of my paintings actually have a lot of research behind them, even if it's not immediately apparent what that research was. And this is a great example. This was actually the first painting in the series that I did, and it started from thinking a lot about the concept of the Rat King in the Nutcracker. Because if you remember the Nutcracker, the Rat King is the sort of evil creature that sort of moves the plot along in the dance, and it's actually from a myth. So the Rat King in the myth is a creature that happens in really dank, dirty sewers where there are a lot of rats that are living. And as they get born, if they're in overcrowded conditions, according to the myth, some of their tails start to knot together, and it creates this multi-headed single entity that has to work together if it's going to continue to survive, sort of like a hive. Each one of them has their own individual brains and their own, digestive system and everything, but they can't get away from the others, so they have to try to work as this one multi-headed monstrous mass to be able to live. And there are actually some mummified versions in some natural history museums around the world, but it's impossible to tell, at least with our current level of science, whether or not they are actually true rat kings that actually existed, or whether someone sort of spoofed them for science. But either way, they're definitely a part of our myth culture about cleanliness and about the ways in which humans interact with the natural world to create this sort of thing, because we created the conditions and the sewers that led to this Rat King development. So I was thinking about that, and I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to portray an animal king? Because one of the both sort of disturbing and yet miraculous things about an animal is that if it's in distress, it can actually voluntarily drop its tail and run away, and the predator might think the tail is the actual food and eat that. They usually keep twitching after they drop, and it just gives the animal a chance to get away. And in this case, if there were an animal king, the animal could willfully drop its tail, and then it would be free from this oppressive, monstrous creature that it became. So that was the underlying concept behind this. And again, I don't necessarily expect people to get all of that when they're looking at this piece, and I don't think they even need to. But it just goes to show what level of research and narrative sometimes comes up behind the end image result.